Here we are, top of the hour, and welcome everyone to the MPF webinar for March. Our topic today is winning the law firm merger and acquisition game. And we've got a great panel with us. My co-host Uri Gutfreund is trying to get logged in here, so hopefully he'll jump in shortly. So welcome everyone to today's program. We are glad you're here. Uri, hopefully you'll jump in, and this point he usually says hello and makes some wisecrack comment, but since he's
hello,
not
John,
I
don't have a wisecrack camera on. My camera's working, rebooting, but I'll make a wisecrack.
He can hear us. So all right, sorry, I'll take that back. But Uri Gutfreund is lurking out there. He is our co-moderator. This is about our 34th, 35th program, and we go back and forth, assault our panel with some questions, and the time flies. Welcome to our panel today. First, couple of beautiful announcements, then I'll introduce our panel. Third Wednesday of the month, we present these programs, 2 o'clock. We got some really interesting programs in the offerings, so keep an eye out for what's coming up. Our leadership conference registration is coming along nicely. We do have a few places left. If you want to come, get to that website, sign up today. We only have about 15, 16 places left. It will sell out May 3rd and 4th, so be there or be square. We have a leadership survey. It's going to be launched in the coming weeks. We do it every other year. Nice snapshot as to what smaller mid-sized law firms are paying attention to, how they run themselves. So be on the lookout for that survey. We had 213 participants last time out, and we hope to beat that mark. We do our newsletter on Fridays. Our website's out there. Hopefully it's a good resource to folks on today's call. And if you come to one of our live programs, we also open up your participation in a listserv, 210 managing partners in there now, and we do some Zoom calls as well, which are smaller groups, very, very interactive. And it was a Zoom call that spawned this topic. Today's topic is winning the law firm M&A game. It's happening, baby. Where are you? And as your firm assesses opportunities or perhaps is approached by regional firms, national firms interested in acquiring you, or maybe a subset of you. As always, chock full of registration, survey results, audience polling questions. We're being recorded. Handouts will be sent to you. And we really want your feedback, folks. So at the end of the session, you'll be directed to a survey, just 4 questions. And we really listen to what you tell us. What do you like best, least, topics for the future? And that sort of input. So we really want to hear from you. Don't be shy, good, bad, and ugly. Our panel, Corey Castillo. Corey is the COO at Lagerlof in Pasadena, California. You'll get to know Corey. His firm's on the acquisition trail. Corey, say hello.
Hey. Excited to share some of the experiences that we've had over the last 2 years, being very intimate with the M&A experience.
Well, and we appreciate so much your willingness to share your experiences with other mid-sized firms and what you're learning as you go about your conversations and acquisitions of groups of lawyers around California and elsewhere. I'm going alphabetically, and H comes next in the alphabet. That would bring us to Roger Hayse. And Roger's been on a few programs. Last one we did was on KPIs. Roger is in Dallas, Texas, is the director at Hayse LLC. Roger, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. As you know, John, our firm does a lot of merger work. I'd say probably 2/3 of it on the side of the acquiring firm, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of our experiences with everybody today.
That's one of the beautiful things about these programs is the sharing. People are so willing to share and learn with and from each other, and it's great to be able to provide that forum. One of our new players to the Managing Partner Forum is Alex Muñoz, and Alex sits here in Atlanta, Georgia. He is the founder of a company called CSR excellence in implementation. And that what CSR is, Alex? Tell us a little bit about what you do and say hello to everybody.
Great to be here today. Thanks for the invitation. It's a team of us combined with non-practicing attorneys as well as project managers, but we work with small to medium-sized law firms. We'll work with them to put together their strategic plan, and if they're so interested, actually implement it. And many times what comes out of that planning process is to acquire, to not be acquired, to sell, to not sell. And I'm just thrilled to be able to be here today to share anything that is relevant and helpful to your team here.
Well, folks ask for subject matter experts, and we strive to deliver. And I think collectively you'll find a lot of experience, expertise on our topic among our panel. And look who showed up.
One time out of 35 webinars, I have a little tech problem, and John's all over me. Well, I'm glad it worked.
You were on the do not fly list. How'd you get in here?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Nice to be here, John.
Anything
Hi, everyone.
else you want to
Glad
say?
to be here.
Jump into our topic?
No, I've distracted enough. Let's jump right into it.
Technology, we gotta love it.
Yep.
As you all know, we do our audience polling questions. This is our first of 4, and largely for the benefit of our panel to give them a sense of firm size represented on today's call. If you would, share with us your firm's lawyer head count. We had 85 plus or minus folks registered today. And I like to joke that as a Georgian, we know how to count votes. We've done it quite a bit. And here is our reveal on firm sizes represented on today's call. Squarely set on mid-law. So that's fairly emblematic of the firm sizes we attract to our programs. So we'll ask you a few more live polling questions. Don't leave the voting booth quite yet. People love the data. When you registered, here's some results of the questions we asked folks. Are you seeing an uptick in M&A activity among law firms in your region?
John, close the poll.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right, Uri. I always forget to do that, don't I? That's one of my things, and that comes up in the evaluations. Remsen, learn how to work the polls. You pride yourself in being able to count votes. So when you're registered, we asked if you're seeing an uptick in merger activity in your regions. And boy, Roger, surprised?
You know, it feels like just a continuation of what we've seen in the market for the last at least half dozen years. Still significant interest nationwide in acquisition activity.
We'll ask each of we have a lot to get into, so I'm going to just kind of go through these fairly quickly here so we can jump in. Is your firm currently seeking to acquire small groups, smaller firms, or groups of firms, not onesies and twosies, but are you embarking on acquiring smaller firms or practice groups within firms? And Corey, does this surprise you?
No, because I think cautiously assessing means we're keeping our eye out, and if something knocks on our door, we'll have that conversation, but we're not proactively knocking on anyone else's door. So I think that's it doesn't surprise me at all. That's the majority of folks.
Are you surprised to see 20% aggressively looking?
That does surprise me, and I think that's because a lot of folks I know might not always be very intentional or strategic with exactly how they want to see their firm develop over the next 24 to 36 months. I'd be curious to know what folks mean by aggressively looking, in that do they actually have a list of 10 prospects that they're actively stewarding in a very intentional way?
Well, we didn't define aggressively looking or cautiously assessing. We find when we ask managing partners how optimistic are they about the future of their firm, oh, they're highly optimistic. And that cautious word tends to come in a lot too, cautiously optimistic. Generally, how successfully has your firm recruited and retained new lawyer talent as we work ourselves out of COVID? 22% of you hit or miss, or mostly missing. You don't want to miss. And this speaks to due diligence, integration, as you bring on talent. We'll be talking about that. And then the last question we asked you was, to your knowledge, I want to underscore that term, to your knowledge, how frequently is your firm approached by larger regional or national firms about joining forces? 7% of you said 5 times or more. We are being courted aggressively. About half of you said, less than once a year. Alex, does this data surprise you at all?
It doesn't. I mean, in preparing for today, I was thinking, you've heard that expression, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And so people get really antsy and they think they need to do these kind of Lego block, add-on acquisitions, or they need to go and start recruiting crazily. Doesn't surprise me at all. Yep.
Well, Roger, you, as we were planning the session here and chatted about polling questions and the topics we wanted to cover, there's so much here. But we've already alluded to it, the importance of having a strategy and being proactive. As we see a lot of movement and consolidation within the profession. So figuring out your firm's place in the market, where you want to go. And to that, we throw in another polling question. And let me move this around here. Polls number 2. And Roger, walk us through this question and kind of what we're looking for. Here are the answers you have, by the way. This was a Roger Hayes question.
Yeah, do you want me to address the question before people vote?
Yeah, tell us talk a little bit about this and why it's an important question.
Yeah, I've been an observer of what's been going on with law firm growth for the last 20 years. And in general, I think we've seen the most successful growth be as a result of a pretty clear plan of what a firm's seeking to achieve with their growth. Versus those that would describe their growth strategies largely opportunistic, which in some cases is really just an excuse for growth for growth's sake, often said. So I was curious, the participants today, where they see their firm and how strictly do they adhere to a strategic plan in pursuing growth.
And Roger, what do you think? I'm going to catch a little off guard maybe, but what do you think the responses to today's callers? Are they driven by strategy or more opportunistic? Where do you think they're going to come in on this question?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, John, in previous polling you've done in surveys in years gone by, people have described their success with growth and whether or not they have a strategic plan in a way that leads me to believe most firms don't have a strategic plan that will guide their growth. Consequently, if that's the result, I would expect far less than 50% to say that they're growing based on a strategy.
We've asked for years, does your firm have a written firm-wide strategic plan? Yes, no, work in progress. And, stuck at 40%. 40%. And we're starting to see a little bit of uptick in recent years. That's a question we'll be asking in our leadership survey. I hope many of you will participate. All of you will participate in that. But it's so important to have a strategy, a vision. Here's the share on that. Spot on. Alex, your comments on the importance of strategy if we're going to be growing?
Yeah, not? I mean, this doesn't really surprise me either. A lot of it is driven by reasons why, the wrong reasons for growth. It could be things like, ego, trying to keep a problem person busy or distracted so they don't, serve as a problem for the rest of the firm, or even just because everyone else is. Having a good strategic plan, being able to, and I know we'll talk about this later on capital raises, but having a good understanding of when you want to do one and what that should look like so you can map it out. I mean, we even recommend to our clients that once it's in the strategic plan, once it's time to start focusing on an acquisition, that a separate project plan should be developed exclusively focused on that so that everybody's, all in alignment.
Yeah, the idea of a search committee, if you will, a search task force, I think is a good one. In any event, I'm not surprised to see this data. Uri, you ask these questions of your crowd up in New York, New Jersey region. Similar data, similar experience from what you're seeing in terms of firms planning.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like people look into mergers and then try and figure out the details. And I know today we're going to talk a lot about strategies. And I think far too many times it's exactly as been described so far, which is it's sort of, I got them, they seem good. It'd be nice to have that practice. It's almost, they've discovered the need after they discovered the product. And I think that is a problem.
Well,
I like the old buddy of mine from law school, or hey, we have a partner retiring to Naples, so we'll need a Naples office, and crazy reasons why we're doing the things we do and hardly strategic.
Well, if we don't have a proactive strategic plan, we'll reactively become part of someone else's plan.
Amen.
That's right. That's exactly right. Corey, I've asked you to kind of lead us in the heavier part of this conversation, which is if you're in the acquisition mode, and most firms seem to have this appetite for growth, whatever it is, appetite for growth. We got to get bigger. Talk to us about what advice you might dispense to leaders, mid-sized firms who do have the appetite to grow, not in onesies, twosies, but in more substantial chunks of 5, 6, 10 lawyers.
Yeah, but I mean, before even jumping into a strategic plan, we'd have to have a value proposition.
Oh, by the way, before I jump in there, or Corey, let me give you the polling questions. Corey asked us to throw these polling questions because I think that'll set up the context of some of the things you might want to say here. But the one question is your firm currently interested, or what's most important if you're currently interested in M&A activities? Is it revenue? Is it succession? Is it administrative relief? Or some other reason that's most important to your firm if, in fact, it's embarking on a growth strategy? Uri, your prediction as to what our main driver would be for most firms?
I think as the acquirer, it's going to be revenue opportunity.
We'll go around the room. Roger, what do you think is the main driver?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a substantial majority being revenue.
Mm-hmm. And Alex?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think that people are going to be also on the other, people are going to be wanting to, for example, get into specific geographies, and that might drive it. But revenue for sure. There you go.
There it is. Administrative relief. Nobody mentioned that. Succession, I frequently see. And we'll talk about that, particularly on the flip side. If you're being acquired, right. That might be a reason for it. And the other question, Corey, you wanted us to throw in the mix is your greatest concern if, in fact, your firm is interested in M&A activities. Is it keeping the culture, having a voice in management, making sure we integrate the enterprise, we want to make more money, perhaps, or maybe lose money, or perhaps some other reason? Corey, what do you think the biggest concern is? And then we'll talk a little bit about your guidance.
I mean, ROI is ultimately the bottom line. So I think that's going to be the first, and then I think culture will be after that.
Close. But there you go. Love these polling questions. We'll share these results with folks, in the follow-ups that will be sent tomorrow or Friday. So that's our second polling question. And in terms of this section, as the acquiring firm, the larger firm on the hunt, Corey,
So
talk to us.
obviously we've defined that a strategic plan is absolutely necessary, because if you don't proactively have one, you will reactively become part of someone else's. But before that, we have to define our value proposition. And before that, we have to define who and what we are. So if we don't know who and what we are, that is to say how we see ourselves as differentiated in the market, how specifically we operate in a model and a function that's different from other firms, then we can't necessarily identify what we're offering someone as a reason to move in with us. And then we can't necessarily put together a route to making that happen. So the first thing that I'd identify is, well, what makes us great as it pertains to our clients? What makes us great as it pertains to our staff and attracting attorneys at all points, juniors, mid-levels, and seniors? And then what makes us great in terms of our culture and how we manage? What's our management methodology? Are we flat and very collegial and inclusive, or are we perhaps a little more hierarchical and have perhaps more of a corporate structure? Is it something in between? Is it something completely different? That way, when we go and we provide that value to those who we're stewarding, whether we're stewarding them aggressively or we're stewarding them a little more passively, we can intelligently speak to how we operate our firm. We can share that value and then very clearly identify whether there's a congruency in terms of what we offer and what they're looking for.
But I have a client that is on the acquisition binge, not binge, but acquiring. They developed a little prospectus, almost a sales piece, with a lot of sensitive data in there, and it covered everything from the networks in which they're a member, some revenue per lawyer, profit per equity partner. It had a breakdown of their management. It listed their top clients.
It's marketing. It's truly marketing.
It's marketing. It truly is. But they're so deliberate that they've developed this prospectus that they will share when we get to the NDA part of the deal, or even before the NDA part of the deal. Corey, where do you think, once we know who we are and what we're about and what we do that's really great, how do we identify folks we might want to be talking to join our party?
Yeah, I think there's three categories to look at when we're identifying who's congruent with us. The first is, do their practices make sense with ours? And in that sense, not looking at 1 + 1 = 2, but 1 + 1 = 3. In that, are there incremental opportunities that we can tackle by joining forces, as opposed to just building Legos, like Alex mentioned earlier. So do their practice areas complement ours? Then does their culture align with ours? And I think at that point, it's very critical for us to be transparent and deliberate with sharing what our methodology is in leading the firm, what works well with our firm, what doesn't, and assessing their response to that. And sometimes that might take a little bit of time. And then financial viability. Once we actually start to look at some of that data, like the data that you mentioned your friend has, does it help us? Is it moving us closer to where we want to be, or are we perhaps going to carry the bag? And if so, how sustainable is that going to be? Is it a bag that we can inherit and then we can turn it around in 12 months, or is it a bag that's going to be a long-term fixer-upper? And so when we start to get into the data, it's okay. We're going to have to take the good with the bad. How much of that is in this mix, and what are we prepared to absorb?
Where do we hire? Do we hire headhunters? Do we look through directories? Do we consult Martindale Hubbell? How do we start identifying our short list of 10 prospective firms we want to talk to? Well, how many?
We've found it effective to do a couple things. First, getting out there and being very transparent and bold with who we are tends to bring people to knock on our door. So I would like the pull model rather than the push model. So gaining visibility, and that will have a natural organic attraction. So that has worked well for us. Two, the referral piece. So as we network just in our local market or otherwise, and we know that there's perhaps a target that we're connected to by one mutual contact, we like to pass a note and say, hey, so-and-so thinks you're cute. Do you want to talk to him? So we do like pass.
Does everybody at your firm know what we're looking for? Part of our recruiting and sales team?
Our recruitment team is very clear on exactly what we're looking for, both in small firms that we're looking to merge with and individually in terms of key roles for mid-levels and seniors. But our firm as a whole might not totally be on the lookout for the exact type of firms that we're looking for. And at the end of the day, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, because as an executive team or a managing partner team, you know, we're looking at the business far different than perhaps junior attorneys or staff would. And perhaps there might be a hesitation for them to look for opportunity, because they would never want that to, they would never want to question, well, does that make me, like, does that put me at risk? You know, I feel secure here. I don't want some more coming in and making it appear as though I'm no longer essential.
So you have a search committee, you mentioned. Do you ever engage headhunters or firm brokers?
We have we have some headhunters and some attorney recruiters. In fact, we just got a nice employment law attorney who is an amazing fit for our culture and has a pretty impressive background, and that came from a recruiter. Although a lot more of it has been organic. In terms of matchmakers, we have been in conversations with a few folks that specialize in finding retiring attorneys who would like to provide succession for their clients and perhaps their small staff, and don't want to just sail off into the sunset, but want to capitalize on their book.
Smart.
Interesting. Alex, you want to pile on, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to what you were saying right at the beginning, Corey, about the strategic reasons. You know, once you've got your mission, vision, values, your statement of strategic purpose, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be how you articulate who and what you're about. That not only drives your ideal client profile, your ideal referral partner profile, et cetera, et cetera. It should also drive your ideal acquisition target profile, if you will. And we found, you know, to some degree, some success when we ask our clients, what are you looking for? In fact, tell us, you know, the ideal firm that if you could wave a magic wand, you could bring them on board. And, you know, we obviously recommend, I'm sorry?
Wachtell. No.
Well, I mean, we obviously
Facetious.
recommend that they start with that. I mean, if you guys really think firm XYZ is the bee's knees, let's go talk to them, you know? But it starts from there. It's kind of like very obvious, you know, steps.
Well, and let me make a comment on that. And Alex, I know you've mastered this and helped folks do this. When we create our mission, vision, and values, particularly our values, I know sometimes we might have the proclivity to create values that we wish we had, or that we believe we should have, that are ideal and
aspirational,
are delusional.
Very important to be very honest and transparent with what our values are, in that they're evident in our behaviors and our decision making.
Yes.
Because if we go out there and date and we present an amplified version of who we wish we were, and then they respond to that also with an amplified version of who they wish they were, or who they'd like us to believe they are, then negotiation becomes very weird, very awkward. Weeds start to come out. And then if after that something actually happens, the sustainability doesn't necessarily go as planned, because, you know, things start to get real.
Well, the lemon laws don't apply at that point, right? I mean, if you bought the wrong kind of car because they lied to you, you can't really apply that same kind of, you know, benefit here or solution. It's important. I wish that term mission, vision, value didn't exist, because everybody rolls their eyes, but boy, it's just killer. You got to have that in place.
Yeah.
Roger.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is to stress the importance of all this front end work and bringing definition to why you want to grow and how you want to grow and what the real fit is for the organization. I've seen survey after survey where people rate the success of their growth. And gosh, I've forgotten the specific numbers, but I think you're talking 2/3 or 3/4 of the growth that managing partners experience did not meet their expectations. And it'd be fascinating to see the correlation between that statistic and the percentage of those people that actually had clarity as to why they were growing and how they wanted to grow in advance of the acquisitions that they did. So, I would just echo what these guys have said. It's just essential to have that clarity before, you launch off into negotiations.
Corey, you talked about practice fit, 1 + 1 = something more than 2, the synergy. You talked about the financial viability. We have to be in relatively the same ballparks, but the cultural alignment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge culture freak, and I think firms are really tuning into how important this is to attract, retain talent, the culture.
Yeah.
How do you assess cultural alignment? Do you get together, have drinks? Do you send them surveys? Do you do psychological assessments? How do you determine cultural compatibility?
Well, first let me frame culture. I know just like mission, vision, and values, culture is a word that sometimes folks kind of like, oh, well, what do you mean? And what I frame organizational culture as, to be very specific, there is the spectrum of behaviors that are favorable and unfavorable, depending on how that unit of people operate amongst each other and deliver a value outside of them. So that's my framing for organizational culture there. But what we'll do is when we go out and we get in a neutral, kind of neutral territory, dinner, drinks, we'll be very transparent with the way we speak, and we'll share examples of decisions that we've made, good, bad, and ugly, to gauge a responsiveness to that. If their eyes light up when we share a certain scenario that we've encountered and our response to it, and they reciprocate that level of excitement, it allows me to trust with a little more confidence that we share the same philosophy on how we ought go about business management. So we'll be very vulnerable in sharing things that we're very proud of, and perhaps things that we haven't been very proud of, and how we go about not just managing, but supporting our people. And if they raise an eyebrow about that, or maybe they perhaps get a little tense, sometimes it lets us know, okay, well, there's something to dig into there. But if they do get excited about it, it lets us know, okay, these folks are on the same wavelength. We'll also talk a little crap every once in a while to see if there's a camaraderie there, that there's a human to human aspect. And so we'll move away from objectively discussing culture and just see if we can make a friend that can hit that tennis ball back and forth very naturally and intuitively. And if they can do that and we can share some laughs, then it's like, okay, now they've affirmed our approach to decision making and management, and there's a just general connection that seems to be sincere and authentic.
Cool. Uri, you want to jump in here? You've been sort of on the sideline, but we don't want to forget you're there.
Thank you, John. I think these are all very good ideas. My contribution on this part of the discussion is focusing and encouraging on the firm economics. And sometimes those are only brought out later, and I think some of those are non-negotiable. I'll give a couple examples, and I think it should be brought out earlier rather than later. The obvious one is your revenue per lawyer, but it's deeper than that. Some firms are real lean, less overhead, less associate leverage, and that's one type of firm. Then you'll have another firm, the practice sounds like it's a good fit, but they have a different economic model. And if neither are flexible on that, I want to get that out as soon as possible. It's either a deal breaker in some instances, or it's something that is sort of negotiable, but you're going to need the most time to think about that. You know, do you really want to have two types of firms? I've seen that. Doesn't always end well. We have one firm in one model. They acquire another firm. That's a different model. Do you want that? At least make a good decision with eyes open, because that's something very important. Two other suggestions. One, think long term. Think in 3 years. How is this going to end up? You know, so many times we've all seen this, where the larger firm will acquire a 10-attorney firm, and within 2 or 3 years, you know, most of them are gone. Was that really the goal? I mean, sometimes it is if it's a succession plan, but I mean if it's not. If it's not a plan to be their succession plan, but you really wanted that 1 + 1 = 2, where you have real integration, why did that fail? It's often because they didn't think that long term. They didn't think it through. And then the last, this is sometimes called the silliest, but I've seen it so important, is the name. The
Especially
name.
a merger of equals or relative equals. You know, that can be very confusing.
Yes.
Get it off
It's
the
ego. It's sometimes ego, but it's also, and can't underscore this, sometimes there's real brand recognition. So it's not necessarily ego, it's brand recognition, and sometimes really where the rubber hits the road is on these panels, where if I change my name or my name's not in the firm name, even at the end, I'm going to have to reapply to be on panels at some of my big financial institutions. And Alex, you've probably counseled some clients through that. You never want to do that. You're in. So that's my 3 bits.
You know, I'm going to turn the page here to being the subject of interest by others. But I'm surprised none of you mentioned remote work, remote offices. As you look to grow, we're seeing hybrid models popping up. We've seen the fully remote firms long before COVID, and how that remote situation might work into a growth strategy. Roger, let me ask you how important you think it is to get that out on the table and have sort of an agreement around remote work. Maybe an office without bricks and mortar at all in our new Miami office.
Yeah, I think where we started seeing a whole lot of this issue really from a cultural standpoint is as COVID sort of took hold and firms were forced to deal with remote work to a greater extent than they ever had before. And then coming out of that, some firms embraced that as part of a new business model, and others have been very rigid in causing their people to, you know, be on site 100% of the time. And I think when you're looking at the cultural compatibility, this has become a huge issue, I believe, in acquisitions and mergers as a compatibility test. What's your position on this issue? Certainly the adoption of the remote work model has increased flexibility for firms that can tolerate it to use the remote work as a means of growing geographically.
You know, I look at Hush Blackwell and what they're doing with their remote partner track. Interesting. I look at Taylor English, a firm here in Atlanta. And if you've heard many of, we've had Chris Wilson on our programs, and they're setting up shop in places like Nashville and Miami and Denver, very key markets for them. Not a lot of bricks and mortar, hoteling arrangements, and growing their presence that way quite successfully. So it's interesting what firms are doing out there to accommodate growth. Uri, I'll give you the last word before we turn the page on being acquired, how you handle that situation.
Well, I think as the acquirer, I think it's been said, but I think it has to start with the hardest part, which is the strategic plan. And I think it's sort of everything else is built on that. So I think that's really good advice that the panel gave. Working through that, it's the toughest part, but everything else, but it has to be done. It just has to be done.
Yeah, know thyself. You know, before you go out on the dating scene, I think you got to kind of like yourself and get a new suit and present yourself to the market. We used a dating analogy as we were setting up this conversation and had a few conference calls among our panel. And in a way, you know, are you sitting at home hoping for the phone to ring? That's no way to find a mate, or is it? You know, you can go online as opposed to, you know, go to a friend's party and meet your prospective mate that way. So be deliberate, be proactive. Don't just sit there waiting for the phone to ring and hoping for the best. Not the best strategy. I like this little graphic. I've been incorporating some fun graphics into our conversation, and you know, you think you're being acquired, but maybe you're maybe you're not. There's a lot of movement out there, and I wanted to now kind of bring our conversation. If you're being suited and are thinking about putting yourself out to market, I have several clients that are very deliberately doing this. And Roger, let me ask you to take the lead from the kind of the acquired firm's perspective, what advice you might offer.
Yeah, I think so much of what we talked about on the acquiring firm side is also applicable to the firm that's being acquired, particularly in the areas of understanding who you are and what you're looking for. In my experience, the firm that's being acquired is much more likely to have a strategic perspective and a strategic end in mind before they enter the marketplace. Rarely is somebody positioning themselves to be acquired as part of a raw growth strategy. It's more typically going to be something like succession, and there's in my experience a greater amount of clarity as to why you want to be acquired than why you're acquiring. One specific thing I was thinking about as we were talking earlier that we so often see missed, particularly at the smaller firms, that these negotiations get started and conclude with the firms being merged without a real understanding of the respective balance sheets of the two organizations, and whether you as the acquired firm are ending up from a net equity standpoint in as strong or stronger position than you went in. You know, an obvious example would be maybe you're merging with a firm that has been on a fast growth track. They financed a ton of it with bank debt. So you got a lot of bank debt, maybe very little contributed capital. Your firm has no bank debt and a lot of contributed capital. How does that shake out in the merger? Are you getting a fair shake on your net equity? Is an important thing we always suggest people look at. The other, I guess one other thought I have that we would, not just because we're in the business, but so often the acquiring firm has done a number of these transactions and has deal-specific experience with law firm mergers, whereas the acquiring firm or the acquired firm very often does not. And they're just so well served to get some bench strength that has been there on law firm mergers to help them avoid mistakes and frankly help them negotiate a reasonable deal. Much more important to the acquired firm than the acquiring firm.
Roger, valuation, you know, trying to get a handle on what it's worth. You talked about balance sheet and unfunded obligations and such, you know, and that's so often the firm up for sale has a self-inflated value. What's the best way to approach that? You know, put an asking price on our shop.
A lot of firms go through a valuation process, either one that they've tried to do themselves, or maybe they've even hired a valuation firm. If you're looking at a merger as your strategy, it ends up just not meaning too much. Whereas if you were looking to sell your law firm, then having an idea of what its economic value is in the marketplace is a much more important discussion.
Interesting. Alex, what advice might you offer the firm being approached?
You know, it really is something that can apply to both sides, but I call it the switch. And, you know, someone that's going to be acquired, someone that's made the decision they want out, they got to be careful, because at a certain point, if they're not watching it, a certain switch will go off in their head, and they've just made the decision, I'm out of here. And they're spending money in their head. Sometimes they're spending money that they don't have yet in real life, planning on this acquisition or this sale going through, and they can start making some really suboptimal decisions. We've done it both in the law firm space as well as in the non-law firm space, but I've seen people go down this track before where it's kind of damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, we're just going to do this. And it's really important to have the mechanisms in place to hold those folks accountable and make sure they're not making those kind of decisions.
Now, there's a difference between putting your house on the market and putting up the for sale sign versus, you know, willing to entertain an offer if a buyer happens to stumble into my neighborhood. If we're going to put up a for sale sign, Roger, how do we field the buyers, prospective buyers coming at us? I mean, do we have a point person? Everybody's got friends getting phone calls. How do we handle this kind of exercise? What would you recommend?
Most often, in my experience, it is the managing partner or chairman of the board that's on point when we're positioning our firm to be acquired and when we're presenting ourselves to the marketplace. In larger organizations that are looking to be acquired, it could be the head of a committee that's been formed for that purpose. But I would guess it's 90+% of the time, it's the leader of the law firm that's on point.
And you advocate a point person?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Should it be a hard and fast rule among us as equity partners of this firm that if any of us get a call, we have an obligation to report it to the group? I find that, you know, the head of the healthcare group is getting calls. People want our healthcare group, but he's not sharing the rest of us, that he's entertaining others, you know, and that can be very divisive. Any guidance around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets back to the question of strategy and process. If we're all on board that we're positioning our firm to be acquired, and we've got all the key players in the firm fully informed, there ought to also be a well-defined process on how we're going to execute that, so that if we've got random people in the organization being touched by the marketplace, whether it's by search firms or a managing partner of another law firm, that we've got a defined process of how that comes back to the point we want that issue handled.
Hey, John, I've got a point that I'd like to make sure.
Yep, jump in, Alex. And you want to talk about integration, I know, and we don't want to lose sight of that. We got 12 minutes, so.
Not yet. This is something that when I first started coming across it, I was hoping that it was an outlier and an aberration, and that it was only limited to small, you know, under 10 attorney firms. I'm seeing this now in 20 some odd attorney firms, and even a recent one was in a 50 odd attorney firm. Make sure that you have a shareholder or a partnership agreement in place.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
All right. Make sure you've got one in place, and make sure that it contemplates doing some kind of a transaction like this, or else it's going to be, you know, the science fair is tomorrow and you're up until midnight because you haven't done your work beforehand. That was what I wanted to say.
The old volcano with the baking soda and vinegar.
Man, or the celery in the glass with the food coloring.
One of the things
you might have some really interesting things to advise a firm on acquired by a firm like yours.
The first question is, are you ready? And then the second question is, yeah, but for real. And what I mean by that is, if you are leading a smaller firm that's about to be acquired, there's this sense of ownership. And let's say you've built it for the last 30 years. You're accustomed to the brand, accustomed to making the decisions. It's hard to let go of your baby after 30 years. And there's these kind of like stages of grieving that spike throughout that process, from when it moves from an idea to a conversation to actual terms to negotiation to execution to integration to sustainability. And there's these little spikes. And it's like, okay, when it moves from a pretty comfortable idea that we're just pondering to now we've got terms in front of us, are you thoroughly comfortable with approaching those terms in a reasonable way? Here's an example of this. We've been in conversation with a smaller firm, and we found that it wasn't the appropriate fit because this person that was leading the firm was not ready, although this person believed he was ready. And so basically, when we got into terms, it was like, hey, I want to work significantly less, make significantly more. I want you to take over my staff and administrative responsibilities, but I want to remain in control. And it's like those don't cohere with each other. And so
to Alex,
I'm like, you got to go shop around for another year.
Yeah,
and let's
come
talk.
back to us. To your point, I was working with a group, and it was kind of 3 firms that came together fairly rapidly to become an 80-lawyer entity. And one office in particular, according to the acquiring firm, the largest of the 3, was that they wanted to be relieved of administrative responsibilities, management responsibilities. We want someone to take over all that stuff so we can practice law. And they tie the knot. And there are different memories as to how involved they would be in leadership and management. How come we don't have a seat on the executive committee like we talked about? It's like, we never talked about that.
Yeah.
You said you wanted out of leadership and administrative response. They never papered their deal. It's unbelievable. You guys are lawyers, for crying out loud, and you don't have the memorandum of understanding as to what it's about, how we're going to run the shop going forward. It's shocking to me, Alex.
The gobbler's children are not only barefoot, they're amputated below their knees, okay?
Okay. I hadn't heard that one, but I like it. Hey, Uri, jump in. Share with us what you got.
Well, I think it's the same story, but I think the acquired needs to be most mindful of it, which is as you are rolling out, investigating, and then rolling out the news, the idea of selling to a larger firm or merging into a larger firm, smaller firms are very, very delicate. And maybe as opposed in the old days where there was more cohesion of the firm, a lot of times if you're not careful about the controlling of the narrative, communicating to your team why you're doing the deal, the ship will fall apart. It will absolutely fall apart because in today's world, each department can, even if they're small, they can go off on their own and then the deal falls apart.
So of course can. They're all free agents.
Correct.
I mean, very
much so today. So I think that's a fear that I think is real, and I think it's something that has to be top of mind as it's communicated, over communicated. People worry, why are we doing this? Does it make sense for me? I think someone said earlier, how does it make my position if we're now part of a bigger firm? And it often is in their interest to join a bigger firm for a lot of reasons, but if that's not communicated.
Yeah, that internal communication, on the one hand, we want to keep this stuff under wraps and highly hush-hush. And on the other hand, we don't want the rumor mill to get out of control. And I got an equity partner coming to me going, what's this going on? And I don't know nothing about it. I learned from my friend at the firm across the street, and man, does that shatter trust. It's the art of leadership. The due diligence, we've talked a lot about this kind of in the course of our conversation, the core values, the financial compatibility, all that good stuff. The firm name, we've seen mergers collapse over that issue. Alex, you wanted to talk about integration and being deliberate, intentional, successful. Once we tie the knot, that we're truly integrating so that 1 + 1 equals something more than 2?
So we're big believers of for all things, this as well as when you hire somebody, having an onboarding plan as well as an offboarding plan, being super intentional about it and erring on the side of asking the obvious questions. I've learned that there's truly no stupid question that you can ask, because people just, they're busy and they assume that things are just going to get done. That integration piece, using little tools like, I don't know if anybody here remembers Jack Welch from GE. He had something called the Welch grid. And it was a very simple tool, but very effective, where you would have a 4-celled matrix. On the y-axis, it was fit with organizational culture. On the x-axis, it was going to be effectiveness. And the 4 cells were: upper left-hand corner was a cheerleader. The upper right corner was a superstar. Lower right corner was a terrorist, and lower left corner was dead wood. You know, mapping that out with the acquired entity and making them walk through that exercise with their people, so that you know who's going to be somebody that we want to make sure is taken care of, who's going to be somebody that we're going to need to spend a little bit of time and extra love and care on, who are the people that maybe we should just, get them out before they become part of the acquired entity, et cetera. I mean, all of those kind of integration things, those really obvious steps are things that we found to be, very helpful to these marriages taking place successfully.
Yeah, I like that reference to the kind of the BCG portfolio grid, where you got your, cash cows, I think was the term they used, and your rising stars, and kind of put people in these boxes. And boy, that sounds awfully heartless, but it's real,
Ultimately,
it's
at the end
real.
of the day, it helps them and it helps you.
Firms on today's call that have some dead wood. I don't know. I think maybe.
Probably not, because everybody that joins these calls are superstars and they don't need any of these helps.
That's right, Alex. That's right, Alex.
You got it. We are approaching the top of the hour. Let me do a go around the table. Anything we haven't yet talked about you want to get in? Corey.
No, just on the integration piece, I think the only thing that I suggest is, beyond accounting for everything, obviously within the structure contractually, from an earn-out schedule to an integration committee, making sure that every stone is accounted for. On the integration side, having a very clear timeline that we do not move from. So if we say this is going to be a 3-month integration process versus a 6-month integration process, and then having every single item that has to be thoroughly investigated, and I mean everything as granular as looking at all of the vendor contracts right away, looking at removing duplications within the first 30 days, setting up timeliness in terms of integrating payroll, moving over benefit, all of that, having it mapped out, and then assigning one person to be the project lead on that, to keep the pace going, to be the stickler on, hey, this is due in 5 days, we got to knock it out, so that, let's say after the 6-month period, it's now a unified, completely absorbed firm. There is no us and them anymore. It's done.
That.
It's one firm in every sense. That's the only thing I'd add to that.
I see that, us and them. Well, the lawyers will refer to themselves as the former firm on both sides. Those Smith Jones guys. No, they're us. We're Smith Jones guys now too. Roger, parting shot.
Yeah, very briefly, we didn't spend a lot of time today on due diligence, but law firm growth is expensive. Law firm growth mistakes are really expensive, to the point of there's been far too many law firms that literally failed as a result of an acquisition that brought the firm down. So having your strategy and doing your due diligence, gosh, it is just so important.
And Alex.
This has been great. I shared with you, John, and if you want to, you can share it with the participants, a scorecard, because self-knowledge is really important to see where you stack up on things and where you do need help and where you don't need help. So I hope that that's of use.
You know, the integration piece, so important. We see it that, you know, firms get together and they don't truly integrate, you know, and that's an important component of it. And Corey, you said it at the beginning. We need to come up with a number greater than 2. Uri, my co-moderator here, we'll give you the last shot, and then I'll go into our reminders, and we'll call it a session.
My final parting thought is that just remember, every single lawyer and every single staff member came to work for the old entity. So cannot underscore how important it is to meet with each of those affected, which is everyone. Do not poo-poo, even if you're the larger firm. People start making up stuff in their head. People get scared. People make up things. It could be the best acquisition in the world, but if you have not communicated and dealt with your people, you're going to have bigger problems than before you started the acquisition.
You know, there's so many places we could go with this conversation, and I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface.
Great stuff.
So
Great stuff.
You'll be hearing more on this topic. We'll get into it at our conference in May here in Atlanta. Yep. If you want to come on down, it'll be a hot topic. Please give us your feedback. We pay attention. We'll send the on-demand recording. Both Alex and Roger have offered a 30-minute consult. Those of you who might be interested in chatting with them a bit more, we'll offer that invitation in the follow-up. Just click on it. We'll get that set up for you. So hopefully this was a helpful session, and come back and see more as this topic continues on. Alex, thank you. Roger, Corey, good to be with you, and always Uri, good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.